Hello there. I am William, and with me today is Sean.
Hello.
And we're going to be reviewing the Blair Witch, which just recently hit theaters. Now, this is just a subset of our full podcast, the House by Video Store podcast. This is just the review section for just the Blair Witch, which we will start off spoiler-free and then very clearly mark when we're going into spoilers and discussing the spoilers from the film. If you want to see more news about things that happened recently in the horror world, you can listen to the full podcast where we discuss that, things we've been watching, some short films we've been working on, and more information specific to things that we've been talking about previously.
And the box office numbers for Blair Witch as well. We dig into that a little bit.
Yep, so we'll talk about all that and more if you listen to the full podcast, but here's our review of the Blair Witch. So the Blair Witch is the, like I said, not direct sequel, but kind of 20 years later-ish type sequel, because I kind of forgot about this. So the original movie in the Blair Witch Project, the footage they found that was made into the Blair Witch Project was supposedly shot in 94.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then found later and then turned into the movie. And then, so then that means that the character, Heather, who's a college student in 1994, had a brother who is in 2014, like late 20s, early 30s.
He was supposed to be 4 years old, I think, when she went missing.
Yeah, so, I mean, not that I know people have had like 20-year differences between siblings, but it's still like one of those things that makes you kind of scratch your head until they lay it all out. And you're like, really? And then like also the fact that, so just the basic synopsis is, without spoiling anything really, there's a YouTube video that gets uploaded of supposedly in the woods in the house where the sister Heather went missing in the 90s. They go to the guy that uploaded the video, and he's going to take him out in the woods and show him where he found the tapes. And it's Heather's younger brother. Was it Jamie?
I think
I forget
so.
everybody's names because they all kind of were not great
Jamie,
characters.
Heather, and yeah.
And so like him and his friends go out to find this house and to see where they found the tapes, and that's the basic setup. And then they all go out, they find the tapes, they find the remains of his sister, they all go home, have pizza, get high, and they live happily ever after. Or not, because that movie would be incredibly boring and be over in 15 minutes. So, as you can guess, when they go on this, things go wrong. So that was the basic setup, and it's found footage, and I was thinking, and I think I said earlier, like a lot of people probably didn't think it would be shot in the same way as the original, because they're running around the woods. Mm-hmm. I mean, this time there's a lot more cameras. There's far more cameras being used and different types of cameras, but they're not used dramatically different than they were in the first one. And, instead of having a map, they have a GPS. And a lot of people said, like, it is pretty close to the original, like, in terms of, the generalities of what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like beat by beat, not really.
It's kind of like Star Wars Episode 7.
Okay, that's a really good comparison.
A remix of an original property with new characters, tackling some new ground and doing different things, but covering it, like
you're going to have nearly the same experience.
Or like the Ghostbusters reboot where, different characters, different, things were happening, but the scenarios ultimately play out in a somewhat similar structure.
Except I feel like those were more of a characters than these people in this film.
Well,
I don't feel like the characters were... I enjoyed the characters a lot better from the original than I did this one, and because there was so many.
Yeah, there was three versus multiple characters.
Yeah, there was so many, and I get it for body count and kind of more of an interesting dynamic. But on the reverse end, what I loved about that original one is, that film was post Real World and stuff and Road Rules. Yeah. And it felt very raw, and it felt very found footage. Like it is not like the found footage films of today. I feel like they're Hollywood films.
And
they're Hollywood films where they have, kind of a lot going on normally. The camera work is normally very exciting or, fast paced. Yes, I feel like a lot more happens. They're a lot of times slicker looking. That original one, the reason it worked was not only because of the viral marketing, was because
it looked like
somebody had their camcorder
out in the woods and they were filming it.
You would believe that if you turned it, like found a VHS at a thrift shop and put this in, you would believe that that's what this was.
Well, you could take the tape, like technically have found the tape that they lost after that movie was done.
Granted, it was edited, but
you could have watched it and then plugged the tapes in and like tape to tape editing, gotten pretty close to what they did.
And there was moments too where it was like, it would kind of be boring to most people if you didn't know these characters. Like if you didn't know any suspense was coming and you found this tape, it would be boring in the same way that people's home movies are. Like they're in the hotel room hanging out.
Somebody
like I love those moments actually. You know what I mean? Because it built the characters and it got you into it. Where this new film, it very much it moves you through the story. It's very much like, okay, let's set up this character, let's introduce this one.
They have the task of setting up who these characters are, what their connection to the original mythology is, and then reestablishing that mythology before they get into the heart of the woods.
And introducing more characters also before that.
So you introduce new characters. You have a core group. So the core group of characters are James, Lisa, who's the filmmaking student who wants to make this documentary about her friend looking for his sister, and then their friends Ashley and Peter that go with them, and Peter is a childhood friend of James. So that's you have the 4 core characters that are the main characters that you start with, whose emotional journeys you're supposed to care about. And then they meet, then like the guy that uploaded the video, Lane, and then I don't know if it's his girlfriend or just his friend or his,
F-buddy.
Or whoever it is, his female associate who goes with him is Talia, and you have so you have 6 characters compared to the original's 3, and they go out in the woods. Like I said, we'll hold off on heavy spoilers until the end, just because I think that
everybody has an earpiece camera. Here's what I liked about it. So
aside from Lane and Talia, everybody has an earpiece camera.
The college kids have like $10,000 or more worth of gear. They've got a drone. They all have they're basically like Bluetooth headsets, but they have cameras in them that are super clear.
Which is not a real thing.
At a DSLR, and I like that Lane is right. The
guy that they meet up with has just the DV.
Lane has a DV camera, which I liked. I was like, oh, that's cool that they're mixing formats, and it kind of brings the old in with the new, and I really like that. But I have to say, in this with the earpiece cameras. I really feel like, and I probably would have taken this same approach too. I don't know if I would have gone that far, but with the drone, everything, if I was making this film, I would have absolutely done the same thing. I said, okay, let's update it. Let's put all these things in. But it almost felt like after watching it and watching the original, a less is more approach makes those films
you have
feel
too many angles,
more grounded.
Knowing what happened to a character off screen, kind of,
you saw everything for the most part,
And 2, there was like a night vision trail camera type thing that you could watch from a connected phone or tablet, which I was like, okay, they're going to do something crazy with this. And then they didn't. And then the drone, I thought, okay, they got a drone. I can think of some things they're going to do with this that are going to be wild. And then they really didn't. And so it's one of those things where I said, like, even though, like you said, even though they've updated it and they have these different types of cameras on stuff, the end product isn't that much different from what the first film did.
And because there were so many angles, and there were some moments too where, like, towards the end of the film, a more of a dramatic moment, 2 characters looking at each other and they're having a conversation and it's cutting back and forth. I kind of like that watching. I'm like, oh, this is a cool way to be able to do that. To kind of
just a wide shot.
It lets you get into the, you're looking into the eyes of the camera and it's more emotional. And I like that. I thought that's really cool. But for most of the other film, like when somebody goes off in the woods by themselves and something happens, you see it happen. In the original Blair Witch, Mike or whoever disappears, and it's like creepy because you have no clue what happened, and you just hear these voices, you hear the sound, you hear sounds in the woods, but also some of the sound in that old film wasn't very good, and it added to the effect. Where the sound design is really good,
they have,
but it
like,
almost pulled me out of it.
They have these almost Jurassic Park sounds of like trees and branches breaking as something's going through them.
That you would hear in a Jurassic Park, not in something with somebody's camcorder.
So the music. So I think that this one has, compared to the original, this has a lot more. And the mythology doesn't, they touch on things from the original film, and then some of the stuff in the materials that, like the supplemental materials that surround, like the documentaries and the games and what have you, I would assume. And I think there's even some comics and stuff. So they kind of, pulled just a few more strands and elements in, to, it makes sense when the movies happen. Once it's in, it's like, okay, all that stuff made sense.
Yeah.
It's just, this reminded me of, I'm not a huge fan of found footage in most cases. Like, there's some stuff that I'm okay with, like The Visit. I thought, comparing The Visit to the Blair Witch, The Visit had much more composed camera angles, and actually had a little bit of a cinematographer's eye to it and a director's eye to it. Like you could tell, like, okay, they had these very specific shots that actually look pretty good, and their stuff's on, it's good steady shots,
and it worked for that because that wasn't the film. It wasn't telling a film about atmosphere or like you literally found a footage. It was about somebody making a kid making a documentary, and it was about the characters more than about like kind of a mystery about stuff happening. So that format fit, and it had a humorous spin to it.
Yeah,
where this,
like, I was expecting, like, being that it's Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett who took like You're Next and You're Next, and kind of took like the home invasion stuff and kind of flipped that on its head to what it typically is. And then The Guest took kind of like an 80s type movie and mixed with like, like The Bodyguard and The Terminator, like all these different movies, and Halloween, even all these different things, and mixed them.
That was a cool beef.
And then remixed all these things. And so I thought with this that they would, with it being, so this movie takes place in 2014. So it's like, so they have the technological advances that they can play with some stuff. Like, they don't have to be confined just to one character at the camera. They can set up situations to get around the limitations of the original and try to remix these types of stories. And it feels like they kind of stayed closer to what the original did and kind of did a few clever things, looping things in. Mm-hmm. But overall, I don't think they did a great job at bringing something new to the genre.
It felt like your typical Hollywood sequel in that it just shows you more. It just like goes into the mythology a little bit more, or maybe shows you more than you saw in the original, and confuses that with being better. Like, I think it should have been. Granted, that first film doesn't show a lot, and modern audiences may not accept that if they were that restrained.
People forget too, like the original, the cinema score for the original film was like a C-.
Yeah.
So it was not, even though it made a lot of money and it has a a legacy, a lot of people hated it and probably had the same reaction to that they did to this.
Yeah.
Because it's found footage and everybody gets hyped about the premises and goes in and realizes it's like, oh, the camera's shaking around and somebody's turning it to themselves and being scared.
And it's a different format than, not anymore, but previously 99% of the other films. But I forgot the point I was making. But basically, I think this film, like I said, I probably would have taken the same approach, but it very much feels like a studio film where they just said, oh, we'll do a little bit more and that'll satisfy the audiences and take things a little bit further. And it was just surprising, again, to see that from Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett.
I mean, like, I think too, like, Bloody Disgusting, how they were quoted in the trailer for The Woods like 8 times, but how it's the most terrifying movie and a reboot for horror and all these things. And I think if you went in with those expectations, like I said, hardcore horror fans or people who watch a lot of horror movies or just movies in general, like, it's very tough to actually get a visceral, reaction to be scared by it. Nothing in this scared me or made me, really be creeped out. Some of the end stuff, I thought, they had some clever concepts, and I would have liked to have seen those played out more.
I've seen some people say, like, oh my God, the last 20 minutes, I couldn't handle it. But yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
And there were a couple moments that almost got me like, okay, cool. Like gave me some sort of reaction.
Yeah.
But other than that, and it was like towards the very end. But it was one of those things where you're kind of peeking, like, okay, what's going to happen? But other than that, yeah, the rest of it was just, I was just sitting there. And my wife was the same way too.
Yeah.
It was very, it was the opposite effect because this film is very much about more of the emotion and the fear or sensations you get from it than thinking of a interesting story with a twist or something like that.
And I feel like a lot of the characters with all these kind of found footage movies are relatively thinly sketched. Mm-hmm. So like, your main character, James, it kind of switches between James and Lisa because she's kind of the other main character. And I feel like they kind of alternate between the two just because, like, they have her really go through more, like, she does more stuff on camera, I think, than he does, really. And like the reasons for, like, you would think they would try to tie all the narrative stuff together more than just kind of separating characters out. But, I think everybody did well enough with what they were given. They didn't get a lot.
The thing that was a bummer about it is, like, you wouldn't mistake this cast for being in a new Friday the 13th film. Like, the same type of characters. The characters, cast, and everything. And it's, again, that original one, it was a sound guy and a camera guy, and there's somebody making a documentary that actually they really didn't know each other aside from doing this job, and it was cool to get them to kind of, you watch them get to know each other, and it felt very, It felt much more natural.
Like you said, like the slow burn in their, reactions to everything, it was over like, multiple hours and like days, towards this was really, for the main characters, like, a 48-hour ordeal.
Yeah.
And, we'll go into that a little bit in spoilers. But
They do play with kind of the rules of the woods in an interesting way. And I don't think they break. It's not like they, break from the original. It's just like, okay, this is happening this way now. And I like that. I like some of the rules that were changed because they didn't feel like they betrayed the original, but they also felt like, okay,
they didn't stick to just what happened.
Yeah. Then if, for other people go in the woods, maybe the same thing doesn't happen every time. And I liked a lot of that, actually.
And like some of the issues I have with it, the character Peter was the skeptic, and like seemed like his role there was just to interrupt stuff every now and then, even though it didn't make a lot of sense for him to keep pushing this guy who doesn't know Lane. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like some of that stuff I was like, okay, I would probably trim some of this out, just because it's like it's not really doing anything other than making him seem to be kind of a dick. And Lane's kind of a dick, so they're both unlikable kind of. And then he's kind of pushing him further, but even though you're supposed to, care more about him. And then, just trying, like I said, like the main thing to me is like you had like a drone, a night vision camera, like all this other stuff. And I feel like they didn't really use any of it to any real effect.
You could have, those weren't available in 96 when the original was it 94?
Or it was 94 when it was supposedly shot.
Yeah,
but it came out in 99. It was shot like a year before that on
so,
DV
that's when you could have done some different scares, or you could have done something different that would have
somebody, they got
set it apart more.
You have the drone up in the air and you're looking at something and you see something coming through the woods towards your location. Like these different things you could do. Have a night vision camera that sends alerts to your phone or something, and play with that. And they didn't really do that. Like I said, it plays pretty similar to the original in terms of the types of things that happen.
There was like setups for that too, like minor spoilers. They're in a tent at one point and they hear something and they've already set up the fact that they put a camera up outside,
and then they don't even
and
use
I'm like,
it.
okay, great, they're gonna look at it and this is gonna be a cool moment. Totally deflates it. There's nothing.
So like the Blair Witch can interrupt all electronic devices except for their cameras. And only the cameras they have on their person. And it's like they can deactivate all the cameras around them, but not the ones they have on them. So
flashlights probably too. They could have been batteries, but flashlights go out. It's.
So I think that like I said,
and also too, another thing that I liked from the original was the townspeople telling the stories. As a kid, I loved that. I thought that was so cool. And even when I rented it, I thought, oh no, I know this is kind of supposed to be real, but I was pretty sure it wasn't real.
Like it felt like, but even interviews they would.
But
do.
Even still, I love that storytelling technique, and this wasn't the. It wasn't the goal of this. Like, he wasn't making a documentary like she was, but he could have been interviewing people about, like, hey, do you remember when this girl went missing? What do you remember? I searched the woods. Like, I would have loved that. Like, I love that. It was a way to build the world to make it feel bigger than it actually was.
Like we said, like the original film, like, the focus was the three main characters, but they did do some stuff in the town before they embarked in the woods. As opposed to this, you have your four main characters that meet up with the other two secondary characters, and then that's it. And all the mythology comes out of the two characters they meet up with, Lane and Talia. And that's where all the kind of backstory comes from.
Yeah, and it was like all the character interviews from the original was almost like the exposition. It was all the things for you to be afraid of for the rest of the film, because it was all these legends and it was different perspectives. And it was like, okay, either the stories are mixed up or, everybody, or there's a lot of things that can happen and you have no clue which one of these stories is going to like be mimicked, or it's not like they told you one story and you're like, oh well, it's going to end up like this. It was a great mystery building device that kind of got you on the edge before anything really happened.
And then too, like the original ones, like was it somebody just messing with them and all that stuff? So
absolutely.
So I would say this one is a far more definitive film than the original. There's much less ambiguity as to what happened, or like
And I thought at first they were leading into that where they were going in a different direction, and it got me very interested. I was like, okay, cool.
I will say there's still some ambiguity to exactly what happened, but you do see things on screen.
Yes.
What happened on screen could be different than what actually happened, but you don't leave that movie wondering. Like, there's this one, not to spoil anything, but it goes further than just somebody being in a corner and seeing a couple of, stick figures hanging in the trees. There's more than that to it.
Absolutely.
You see more than the first film did.
I thought they were going to put a different spin on it based on some things that were kind of teased early on in the film, or maybe the middle part, which I really liked.
They could have gone in a number of different ways and had been something completely unsupernatural, and it's just they kind of in the original they kind of started going crazy, and it was just people messing with them in the woods, and then whatever. They could have done that type of tact, but they didn't. I mean, granted, that may have not worked, and that with the second film, even though they kind of disowned it in this one,
no,
they have all the mythology.
I don't think they should have disowned what happened as far as supernatural stuff in that original.
They just could have,
but they could have, they could have had a different direction with this.
Yeah. So, I mean, so like ultimately, I think overall as a found footage film, and like if you're into found footage, I think a lot of people are kind of out on it now. And you like that universe, I think it's worth watching for that aspect. I don't think it's a great standalone film that you'll get enjoyment out of just anybody who watches it. Because I looked on Twitter earlier and I did see people complaining about motion sickness, which people do complain about with most of these found footage films like this and Cloverfield and the original. I don't experience that, so I kind of can't really comment on it, but I could see how it would do that. And I looked at a bunch of people on Twitter just to kind of get a general feel. Some people really liked it and thought that it was very scary. Some people said it was whack and the dumbest stuff they've ever seen. The IMDb reviews, there's like some 8s and 9s and 10s, and there's a lot of 1s. So I think a 1 is a useless review because that's just a 1 is a movie. Yeah, you should give that review very rarely, and I think most movies fall more like worse like a 3. Whereas this, like I've seen, I think on the average
1 is like incomprehensible.
Yeah, one is where they had no clue what they were doing. It's not a comprehensible final product. It doesn't really work,
and it's baffling. Like who? Like that's like The Room.
Even The Room is like a 2.
Yeah, okay.
like a 1 would be the Room or Troll 2. If you took Troll 2 because it's technically like it's competent, like they made it. But if you took that movie and made it technically incompetent, because the story doesn't make any sense, but if you made that movie technically incompetent, then that's a 1. Whereas this, like I think on IMDb it's like a 5.8, and Rotten Tomatoes it was like a 30-something%. I think at 30% is probably a little bit low. I mean, like if we had we talked a little bit more now about like giving it like a review like score out of 10. Like if I had to rate this one like out of 10, it's like a 6. Like for found footage, it accomplishes its goals. And also the environment I watched it in, I saw it at the theater, and I think some of the people there kind of ruined the milieu and the environment, which hurts these types of films. Because there was a group of people that brought like 6 kids or five kids who were all like age 10 and under who talked, and they were like 5 or 6 rows behind me. So for me there were people sitting in the rows in between us who didn't say anything to them. And I was going to say something, but it's like I will literally have to stand up and turn around and yell very loudly for them to hear me. And like the kids were I think they're speaking Farsi. Not that I'm a master on dialects, but just for whatever, I think that's the language they're speaking. So they didn't speak English, or the kids weren't speaking English.
So even if you did say something, they might not have understood you.
So did the kids know? I mean, I would assume they know English because most people are bilingual, especially if you're seeing a movie that doesn't have subtitles and stuff. They eventually left. They left with like 30 minutes left, and then there was a couple in front of me that left just because I think they got bored. But just
so they left with like 10 minutes left, right?
Yeah, like they left after all the stuff happened. So I don't think they left out of being scared. I think they just left out of not liking what they had seen. Yeah. And then the family that brought like the husband, the wife, and the 5 kids that didn't pay attention to the movie at all, which, it's a night showing. They spent like $70 or more to see this movie. Why you would leave with 30 minutes left or even come to it to begin with? Like, did they know what this is? Like, when I saw them come in, I was like, when you bring that many kids to an R-rated film, it's a horror film, that's a terrible decision. But the fact that they were talking far enough behind me that I would have had to interrupt the entire auditorium to say anything. And then like they typically didn't talk loud enough for me to hear it, but I could hear it every now and then. Mm-hmm. The people behind me had to hear it nonstop, so I don't know why none of them said anything. But I think that kind of hurt the vibe of it. Like horror movies can be helped by a good crowd or ruined by a bad crowd. This one, it kind of took me out of a little bit, knowing all this shit's going on, that people are leaving with time left. So that kind of took me out of it. But and then you said your crowd was relatively light.
There was or nobody one person that came. First of all, we thought some people were behind us. They may have left actually because we thought I walked in and I was like, okay, great, I'm ready to see this with a big crowd. And it was pretty early in the night, so I thought, well, maybe there'll be like
fill out.
Maybe 25% of the audience chairs will be full. Nobody was in there.
Yeah,
and then one guy came and sit down like way up front, and then I think we saw 2 other people. But when we got up, the two people in the back were gone, and the guy had got up and left like 10 minutes in. So, yeah, I saw it in basically an empty theater, which was unfortunate.
I don't get, you go into that movie, like I said, you know what it is. It's a found footage film. And when you go in and it is found footage, you leave after 10 minutes. Like, do you go get your money back? Like, they typically don't do that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Unless it's like an issue with unruly people in the theater.
Yes,
a lot of times give you refunds. But if you just don't like it, they typically like, well, sorry.
But when I walked out of it, I was like kind of conflicted. I was like, it's kind of a weird thing because they didn't betray anything from the original film. There were some cool things in there, but I probably would have walking out, I probably would have given it like a 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And then over time, even thinking about the original and like the things that I didn't like about it, and, it's not me like being over analytical, but I just like, actually I'd probably give it like a 5 or something. Like it wasn't terrible.
And too, knowing who it came from, I expected them to do something.
Yes, that too.
I expected it to be a twist on the conventional found footage genre, and it really wasn't. It was just another entry into that genre.
Mm-hmm.
The only twist at all they had were into some of the story hooks, but the actual presentation of it and the way it played out wasn't that dissimilar from the first film and wasn't that much different than the hundreds of movies that have been made with people running around in the woods since then.
Yeah, I was really hoping this would be like the film this year where we could say, okay, this is like a good contender for best horror film of the year. And it wasn't terrible. It wasn't, and I may have rated this lower than I've rated some, other films that I like, actually, I think I may have liked The Conjuring 2 more than this. You know what I mean? Like, unfortunately, because I wasn't super hot on that, it's like, man, I even like that film better than this, I think. I would watch that again over this.
Based on who's involved, I expected this to be towards the top of my list. And as it is, like, you still kind of have, like, even though it's not necessarily, all just straight horror, you have, like, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Don't Breathe, Green Room, and then, like, this falls somewhere down below those. Mm-hmm. And I was really looking forward toward it, for it to be towards the top of that list, just because who's involved with it. But, it's not terrible. Like, if you hate found footage, there's absolutely nothing here to turn you around on that.
There won't be any good story hooks or anything like that makes it worth it.
If you hated the first Blair Witch, you won't like this one. Mm-hmm. If you love the first one, I think this one is worthy of checking out. If you really enjoyed the first one, but you got to be in the right mind space for it. And, it's found footage, which is a kind of a roadblock to get over, over time. We kind of forget, like, oh, it's just shaky cam running around stuff. And even though they have, like, the filmmaker angle, it's a lot less locked down than something like The Visit, where that, like I said, that had more of a shine of the director and the cinematographer, like, coming through than this film, where I couldn't really tell you any one, like, beautiful shot that happened.
Yeah.
So, I think just kind of to in conclusion, before we go into the spoilers, if you like the first one or you love the first one, it's worth checking out.
Just based on curiosity alone. Just on the legacy of that series and the film.
To see how it plays out. If you hate found footage and you hate the first one, there's absolutely no reason to pull this one out and watch it. So I think that kind of gives a strong opinion. So before we move into spoilers, one thing you can do that is very helpful for us is you can go out to iTunes and leave a review, because it helps other people find the podcast and helps us move up the charts. We have a couple out there, so it'll be very helpful if you listen on a regular basis to go out there and do that for us.
We need to keep boosting those, because
that just helps more people find it. Even though we have a lot of people listen on YouTube and leave great comments and have some feedback and some back and forth, the iTunes comments are something that'd be very, very, very helpful for us to have.
And some Facebook likes. We're getting pretty close. We got over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which thank you very much for that. And then Facebook, we're getting close to 1,000. We're probably like 35 or 40 away. So
we've been picking some up recently.
Yeah, help us get that, because William's film's coming out in October, and then another one is coming out before that he's going to do. So we'll have some original content that those will maybe post it directly to Facebook as well as YouTube. But
I think we'll post,
help us out.
I think we'll post all that stuff directly, because the way Facebook works, you just need to post it directly there and YouTube and whatever. But we'll do that. So you can also send us emails at podcast@housebythevideostore.com. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, or recommendations for us to check things out that we haven't talked about before. And you can always go to the website, housebythevideostore.com, to find all the work we're doing and find links to everything we're releasing and all of our social media accounts. Like we said, Facebook is the most important place to follow us, because that's where we post all of our stuff to and post everything there. I mean, it's also on the site. It's just Facebook. Like I said, it's the number one way to get content in front of people. and then they've made it so that you need to post all the content directly through them. Like if you post a link, it doesn't go anywhere. If you post a piece of content directly there, it does.
And when you like us, hit that, what does it say, see first or something?
Yeah, like it's up in the right-hand corner on the page.
Yeah.
And just make sure, because like when you like a page, they have all these algorithms in place. So if like a page has, let's just say for instance, 1 million likes, which ours is nowhere close to that, but you have 1 million likes and they post a piece of content, maybe like 4,000 people see it, just that they post it and no one shares it. So you have to have people share it a lot from like their personal accounts. You need to have
people see it. People marked the site as see it first or the page.
So if nobody's marked it as see it first and you just post it, a small percentage, like 2% or something, or less than 10% of your followers will see it in their feed unless other people share it they're friends with, or you pay to sponsor it and make it a sponsored post. Which
and
is
we
what
don't spam a lot on there either. We basically post our content and occasionally a picture.
We rarely post this content about the same thing twice. Yeah. It's usually one-time thing. So that's the Facebook is an important place to follow us.
And with October coming up, we're going to have a lot more stuff hitting at video blogs, some shorts. So
yeah, we may try to do. So we have like the ones we talked about, and there may be some other smaller stuff we try to do if we have time. So that's a important place to follow us. You want to see the content we got coming up. And then if you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Twitter at Will_Droid.
And on Twitter, I'm at BlevensSean. And our House by the Video Store one is HBTVS_official on Twitter as well.
On Twitter and Instagram. So
all right, spoilers, right?
Spoilers for Blair Witch. So the movie starts out when James sees the video. So that's the only kind of clever thing to me, or thing that was kind of makes you think about it. So the video that he sees uploaded to YouTube by Lane is the video that they shoot at the end in the house. So there's some time loop thing going on.
Which there's a time loop in the woods as well.
Yeah, because
so it makes sense in the mythology of this film.
Because so that was like made me think about it. It's like, okay, so the tape that they filmed in the future somehow ended up.
It made you think, but maybe not enough to save the film, though, unfortunately. No, it was just like, okay, that's kind of cool, and that's it.
Yeah, it's not a huge thing. Yeah. And then you have to think about, okay, well, how involved in all this was Lane?
Yeah.
And, Talia obviously wasn't super deeply involved in it because the way she died.
Well,
or maybe she was, but
it appears that the Blair Witch, gets people to do things for them.
Yeah.
So it's like he was probably just under her command. If he goes out to the woods all the time, maybe something happened to him and he let her go when he was looking for the footage or whatever.
But then, he kind of claimed he'd never been in the woods before, so where'd the tape come from?
Yeah, he hadn't been that far in the woods.
So there's the element to that maybe more explains somewhere else in supplemental material for the movie, or if they ever get around to making a sequel. But so that element was kind of interesting. And then too, though, a thing that's a plausible thing is so the guy James worries about trying to find information about his sister 20 years later. Obviously he knows she's dead. It's very unlikely that somebody's missing for 20 years in the woods and would be alive. Mm-hmm. So the only thing you could possibly want to find is
evidence of her body, or yeah.
And so I get that aspect, but at the end when he thinks he sees her and goes in the house in search of her, with all the stuff you've seen. Maybe she could still be technically alive because there's all this supernatural time elements. Because it appears so Lane and Talia, when they run back into the main group, they, or at least based on they said, they've been in the woods for 5 days. Mm-hmm. And then if there are other characters, it's just later that afternoon to them.
Which I really liked. I liked when they started introducing that element.
So they had that element to where maybe the Blair Witch was doing something different to Talia and Lane than it was doing to James and Lisa and Peter and Ashley, because it was going after them in a different way. It wanted Lane and Talia to be her servants and do what she wanted. Mm-hmm. And then actually wanted to kill and go after these others.
I feel like there was pockets of sub-realities in the woods that kind of bumbled up against each other, and they happened to cut through, and go back and forth, and it was almost like a bubble.
And then at the very end, Lane, when they're in the house, has a beard, which would have taken him months to grow because he was, clean shaven, clean face. So you have all these elements that are kind of interesting like that. And then, the actual in the woods stuff kind of all happens at once. All of the craziness all kind of happens.
Well, they're not in there for multiple I guess, daylight cycles.
Because it turns into night and stays night.
Yeah, it turns into night and stays nights, which I kind of liked, but at the same time, I liked that it very much stressed out the characters in the original because there was a lot of time passing. It's hard to tell. It's hard to think about the time passing when they kind of say what's going on, but yeah, I feel like there was less. I feel like the other one, it was able to build
a sense of dread because they're lost in the woods and you can feel the days ticking away.
And some of the same stuff happens, like the rocks, and I love that the sticks were put there by Lane. Like, that's the twist. I thought maybe he was luring him in there for some other reason.
Yeah.
Or maybe he was trying to make a fake documentary on his own and like saying, just to try to get popularity because he wanted to post it online. Like maybe he staged all that stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe it would turn bad after that, or there was still some witch stuff, but because he lured them, they didn't go any further with that. Like it ended there and that was it. And maybe it was, if the witch was under control, then why would they have him put that, why would she have him put those sticks in the trees and him get caught for it? Maybe it was to create friction, but it was an interesting thing they started touching on. And then it just kind of dropped off from me.
Like, if it had been like they brought them out there on false pretenses, because they brought them out there because they wanted to go into the woods themselves and hadn't done it, and they wanted other people to go with them. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of what it was. But like maybe if it was
or the witch was using them to lure him. That's what they had said.
Yes. So it had been more sinister and been like he wanted to take them out there to make his own documentary and get YouTube fame and all this stuff.
Yeah, to terrorize them.
And then kind of like the House of like Spooks or whatever from the original 13 Ghosts or House of Haunted Hill, or one of those like where like the house isn't actually haunted. Mm-hmm. So that you go out there and he's trying to make all this stuff seem like it's actually happened in accordance with the legends, and they get deeper in the woods and then they find out that he's a fraud, and then it actually starts happening, which is kind of what happens in this. But like to play more into that and make that the central theme, versus the stuff about James trying to find his sister.
Because once that's over with, it just kind of turns into it kind of turns into just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare.
There's a lot of jump scares, and then like Peter, when the tree falls on him and he gets like drug away, like there's not a lot of dread to that.
No,
like it doesn't really build.
Like I said, there would have been more if you didn't know what happened to Peter. If it would have been from the camp's perspective and you kind of heard it. And then they were looking for him, because then you wouldn't have, like the notion of not knowing makes it scarier than a tree fell on him and then he got drug away. Like, that's nothing too exciting.
What you would have come up in your mind would have been more effective than what they did, which is similar to the first film.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
So you had like that, like the drone, I think they completely wasted. They had it fly up once and look around, fly up again and like lose control and fall in the tree. And then just for the record, the battery in that would not last long enough for you to find it later. Those batteries last about 20 minutes.
That's what I told my wife. I'm like, man, ours lasts 20 minutes. I granted there's some time loops, but still.
Yeah, so that was like, and two, like you can control it from a phone, but you really need the remote and stuff, right, to properly maneuver it in a forest.
They had those weird earpiece cameras that don't exist too.
Yeah, so the technology stuff you can kind of give a pass.
Yeah.
But like the girl climbing up the tree to get the drone, like I get why she would do that, because you could try to use it to see where to go. But if it's dark out, it doesn't really do anything. But, you can get, like, I just wish they had done more with that technology, that they had done something beyond just go up.
Because like I said, having all these camera angles, all this stuff going on, it doesn't help it for me. It kind of takes away the I guess, realism that the first one had. Granted, we've seen so many found footage films,
and even
at
the VHS
this point.
films that,
but still, it would have kind of make it feel less like a fast-paced, fast-cutting film.
Yeah.
If they would have, it would have been definitely less is more approach for that. But another thing I did like though was the voodoo doll elements.
Yeah,
I like that. That was cool. So they find one of the sticks and it has some of the girl's hair on it, I believe.
Some of Talia's hair in it, and then the girl Ashley's kind of freaking out, and then snaps it, and then it snaps that girl in half.
Yeah, which I like. That was cool.
Like that kind of played into the original one, like when that one guy's hair was in something, or I think that's what, or no, they found teeth or something.
They found his fingers and stuff in the bundle of sticks.
But like it tied into the kind of mythology of the original in like an interesting way.
Another thing too they tied into was, wasn't it where she got hung upside down and stretched or something?
Yeah.
And so she kind of, what she was possibly a form of the witch, has like kind of long arms, or is kind of a giant almost.
And two, something I forgot to mention earlier was there's kind of a body horror element to it with Ashley getting like her foot cut and then later having the stick thing in her. So they kind of went in like one direction with the body horror, but didn't really go anywhere because of that. Maybe like, oh, now is she possessed?
Yeah,
and then
she kind of got sick and then died. Yeah, it went in the same direction as
she died by getting knocked out of a tree.
It's same direction as them faking the sticks and the drones. Like it went nowhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like this.
She climbed up in the tree to get the drone. After all the body horror stuff, when she pulls like the stick thing out, she climbs up in a tree and then gets knocked out and is dead.
It was an interesting thing to kind of explore, but again, they
kind
wasted it. You know, it was almost like a parasite or something.
Yeah.
And it almost, you know, part of this almost has a extraterrestrial feel to it because there's some white lights.
They're in the house and there's lights
very much of
it.
folks like a UFO. I mean, that kind of felt like it too. So some people were talking about that angle as well.
Like the alternate ending to the first Silent Hill, like where it's like a UFO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought that would have been interesting as hell if that's the direction they went.
I thought too, when I saw the aliens, I was like, hey, if this was an alien, that would be a Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett twist that you would kind of come to expect from them. Like, you know, taking the mythology and twisting it. Because really, you know, people love that first film, but it's not so precious. It's not The Shining. You know what I mean? It's not this masterpiece on every level. It is very much a film that kind of just happened to hit.
It's urban legends too. So like, you know, they could have twisted it into what was happening was so beyond the scope of people's comprehension. They made up these kind of urban legends and these interconnected stories and what have you. So like, but just the
time bubble felt like a sci-fi thing as well, you know. So
and you actually like, or even like a Twin Peaks like Black and White Lodge type situation, but it didn't really go that far into it. You actually see the Blair Witch at the end, like obscured in a little bit. And I thought that the elements, like when they're actually in the house, and then Lisa has to go through like the tunnel and the scene you've seen in any of the trailers where she's like in the puddle in the bottom, like that was, you know, claustrophobic and maybe really glad that I wasn't the one in those tunnels.
Yeah, my wife did not like that. She couldn't really look at it.
They didn't really do much with this aside from her she heard a noise and got out. And then
it's not like something was like she could feel something but you couldn't see it or something.
And she came back out into the basement and then stabbed Lane when he attacked her. And then so she goes to the house and, you know, her and James end up in the attic. And then they sit in the corners because the Blair Witch can only kill you if you look directly at her.
Which is it's kind of cool that they build on that mythology.
Built on the original.
Yeah, which is I enjoyed that part of it.
And then Lisa has the idea to use the camera to look behind her because you're not directly looking at it with your person, so that can so you think maybe she'll try to get out of the house backwards with this camera.
Again, a great setup.
But then she immediately, when she hears James whisper, turns around, and then James hears the whisper or thinks he hears the whisper of his sister. We don't hear it as the audience. You just hear him like talking as if he does hear it. So they kind of had these elements and then just kind of abruptly ended it with the characters getting killed by the Blair Witch, who you kind of saw. But I thought they could have had a lot of, you know, creepy, you know, like on Evil Dead, they had like the eye game, like where in the movies, like where Ash and like Linda were looking at each other and like their eyes are open and shut. Like you could have had a bunch of interplay of stuff like that, like with that camera trying to get out.
Yes.
They set up all these elements that had they went through on any of them could have elevated the material.
Yeah.
But it feels like all the ideas they had, they kind of stopped short and went back to the conventional.
Another thing they pulled a lot was I felt like that great scene in Signs when you see a glimpse of the alien.
Yeah.
They do that several times, which is pretty cool. You know, they use it effectively for sure. Like you see a glimpse of it in the woods as well.
Yeah, and you see it scream kind of and come
then
towards Lisa.
In the house, of course, there's like an old lady or something in rags. And somebody said, oh, well, maybe that was the witch before she got tortured out in the woods or stretched and stuff, which I really liked all that stuff. But yeah, it was just a lot of elements that
none of them.
You know, they took some things so far where it, again, they showed so much of certain elements that kind of took away some of the suspense, but then on other sides they didn't explore things enough. And and really, like I would have went the direction they probably did too. I maybe would have tried to put more of a twist on it, but I would have done the multiple camera things. You know what I mean? Like I would have probably thought, I could do the brother. Like I don't fault them for that, but you know, it's a lot easier to sit back and watch it and be like, that didn't work. This didn't work. This didn't work.
To be an armchair filmmaker trying to figure out, because that's also a franchise that there's a reason they haven't tackled it. Lionsgate, you know, hasn't tackled it in, you know, how many years.
Well, did you hear the story about how this got started?
Well, they had ran into the producers of it at a party, I think after the first VHS it came out, or VHS, and then maybe it was VHS 2. And they had, you know, asked like, why haven't you ever made a new Blair Witch film? Because that property's just sitting there. And then they got called in later to pitch. the project, and then got it, and then made it in secret with anybody knowing it was, and then Blade Disgusting had heard that it was the Blair Witch like a couple years ago, and really nothing really came of that. It was just a few articles they wrote, and it was called The Woods, promoted as The Woods, and then obviously it got revealed as the Blair Witch. But I just think the method they promoted it hurt it.
Yeah, part of me wonders too, was this Simon Barrett and Adam Wingard, like, they did You're Next, and not to say the twist in You're Next or The Guest, like, was anything that would turn audiences off. If anything, I think they would be interested. But it was this their attempt of saying, okay, look, we did those two films. They weren't franchises. They were kind of our passion projects.
Yeah.
They did moderately well. They weren't like huge. They weren't, John Carpenter's Halloween.
Yeah.
But okay, let's do the Blair Witch. Let's just try to make another financial, hugely financially successful film to kind of put us on the next level.
And if they
give us
the
more cachet.
Yeah,
they obviously were fans of the original if they were asking about it and stuff.
Yeah.
So if I wonder if they played it more reserved because they thought, okay, well, let's satisfy the audience with this one, just to hopefully make it a successful film financially for the studio. Again, to get our name out there more, and unfortunately, it just didn't work. Like,
I mean, like, it's a found footage film. Like, I think that if you didn't have any of the context of knowing who they were, what they had done, I think, like, as a sequel to the Blair Witch, like, it works well enough, but it doesn't really elevate anything or change the game, as Blade Disgusting acclaimed.
It very much feels like normally there's an unnecessary remake. It feels like an unnecessary sequel to me.
Like, I mean, I get to they want to replicate the scenarios from Paranormal Activity and some of these other films where you have, like, stationary cameras and all that stuff. But I just really, like, when they had that that night vision, like, UV trail cam or whatever it was that was hooked up outside the tents, like, I was like, okay, I'm ready to see some shit happen. And then they didn't. They woke up the next morning, it didn't capture anything, it wasn't on, and there's all the crosses. Like that's where I think you kind of glimpse, like, pieces of things, but you don't show any, like, you set up scenarios and you show people things where they don't actually see what's happening, so their imagination is worse than what could ever possibly be.
And maybe their approach was like, oh, well, let's psych people out because they expect to see something and they won't.
Yeah.
But again, that was an experiment, and I think it failed, though, because I think not showing that was more of a disappointment. We would rather see the things we kind of expect, than just be disappointed and see nothing at all.
And then, like you said, like the end when, like, the lights are coming through, like, all the wood on that house, like, because essentially, I was thinking, like, okay, so the Blair Witch, it could just be like this house is like a Black Lodge situation from Twin Peaks, where it's like this kind of mythical thing.
Yeah, because it's there and it's not there.
The
apparently.
Blair Witch could not even get in the house or be the one in the house. It needs to get them into it, which is why it scared Lisa at the end and made her go in the house, because they need them to get in there for some reason. But then, like, the Blair Witch is actually in there, so it just kind of did what you expected, and like, that part was more intense than the rest of the film, and it kind of had a feel of, like, a lot of the stuff, like the Silent Hills PT, like, playable trailer type stuff, and the more recent Resident Evil trailer, kind of like this creepy
absolutely.
house milieu, like, you're going through in a loop and stuff appears and it's not there. Like, it had the feel of more modern type stuff during the house scene. I just feel like they could have done more to mix it up, and beyond just having different types of cameras, like the looking behind you at the camera to see the Blair Witch and avoid her. Like, I think all that would have been, if they played that out longer and made it, built up the tension more of, looking at the camera, nothing is there, and you're going around the corner, and then you catch a glimpse. Like, they did it a little bit, but playing that out longer and more of a set piece, more of a Spielbergian, Hitchcockian set piece, would have really elevated and ratcheted up the tension. Because, like, Don't Breathe, even with all the story problems in it, they set up these set pieces. They got everybody in the theater I was in into it.
Yeah.
I think if this had set it up more like that and had these, like, little, payoffs and build-ups, I think that would have maintained the audience more and made people not give it such a low overall score. But,
well, and it was cool that by the end she's using kind of the old mini DV camera.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it looks pretty close. It doesn't look different enough to me. And really, that was another thing that kind of took you out of it, because everything looks so good. Like, we mentioned the drone was, not a GoPro.
Yeah, like, if you
didn't even see the shadow.
If you watch the beginning of that film, so, like, before they go into the woods or whatever, they have the drone outside and they're doing a test flight with it. And the shadow that it leaves, it's a little DJI Phantom drone, which is the one you see everywhere. It's the one that's, like, South Park did a parody episode about drones. It's like, that's the one you've seen everywhere that has little GoPros attached to them. Then the shadow is the larger, like, big rotor drones that are heavy duty, that can carry multiple pounds of stuff, where it has, like, a red camera on it or something. So just the shadow of that, instead of being the $1,000 camera, it's like the $6,000 camera with the $20,000 cinema camera on it.
And again, like, and it's not about, for me, it's important on this film because it's about the reality of it. Like,
Suspension of disbelief.
I wanted to see some noisy footage in the woods, like from the DSLR or whatever. I wanted to be distorted, so you couldn't exactly see what was going on. But everything looked like it was shot on these beautiful cameras, and that breaks the reality, the false reality for me, because it doesn't look like something that I would see on YouTube now, as opposed to, you know what I mean? Like
before we did this review, like I showed him some videos like on the roofs, which I believe most people have probably seen. It's like the people who are Russian, I believe, that climb up the tall structures in China and across the globe. They climb these tall structures and they have like bandanas or masks on their face and head-mounted GoPro cameras, and it's all first person. Sometimes they have like DSLRs and they'll take some pictures or some time lapses or stuff. And it's all done illegally. They just kind of sneak in these places and do it. So you have videos like that. That was like, maybe a possible setup for the Blair Witch would have been like a group like that hears about this abandoned structure that's like crazy, and they go to it not knowing what it is, and then you have all this stuff built around the house.
And you could shoot it in a different way with GoPros on the head instead of,
instead of doing the traditional Hollywood sequel route where it's tying, mythology and characters from the first one into it. There's a lot of ways they could have went. I mean, I think what they did here worked in some parts, but overall to me, as a found footage film, it was fine. I'm not going to go back and think about this very much or rewatch it like I have the other films made by this duo. And I don't think it'll have the legacy of the original film. Like, it may be seen more favorably over time than its box office performance and current ratings are predicting right now. Just because I think there was a little bit of backlash to it just being found footage in a big franchise film.
It's not terrible. It's just unexciting if you're not taken in by the jump scares.
Yeah, jump scares galore in this one. They're all over the place. Because I was trying to think of Don't Breathe had jump scares that led into something. Like, there was not a jump scare that happened that didn't result in something else. Like, something comes into frame, it's a person's hand, they're doing something, and it results in something. This one, there was a lot of jump scares of like somebody's looking at their phone or tablet or something, they put it down, there's a person from
yeah,
and there's a lot of jump scares like that before shit hits the fan.
Something else I want to mention too, I forgot. So earlier in the podcast, I talked about Long Weekend. The film about kind of revenge of nature almost.
Yeah.
Something interesting in that film that kind of ties into this. They're driving around their truck trying to get to their campsite, and they see a tree with an arrow on it. They're driving around a while, and they see it again.
Yeah.
And they keep coming back to that. And then they realize like it's almost like they're stuck there.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if that was at all in the minds of the original creators of Blair Witch. Because it is about them being lost in nature.
Yeah, because in this one they get lost and find their campsite again.
And in the original too, they did that as well. They walked almost all day and they got lost
at the
again.
same spot.
So it was just kind of an interesting tie. Like, I just happened to watch that film, but it was very much about nature as well and being lost in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to their next film because I like their work.
Because Adam Wingard's directing Death Note.
Yeah.
And apparently, like, Jason Eisner was his second unit director, and they supposedly shot a lot of crazy stuff for that. So I'm excited to see what they have coming up next. It's just with this one, I wanted it. I was excited for it, and it didn't live up to what I did. It wasn't a reinvention of the genre, as some people have claimed. It was just another entry into it that doesn't feel substantially better than some of the Paranormal Activity sequels or some of the stuff in like VHS 1 and 2. I mean, it feels more in the milieu. It doesn't stand above the genre or do anything, incredibly new. It just does some new things with that mythology, but like I said, nothing in it doesn't redefine that genre.
It may, based on the box office,
it may dissuade people from spending significant money on like Mark Duplass is going to make Creep 2. That movie, I would assume the first one was so cheap to make. You can bang those out if people watch them on Netflix and stuff. Like, this may have done far better as a Netflix exclusive than as a theatrical film, but then you wouldn't have all the hype around it. But like, out of the movies, I was disappointed in this one. I wanted to like it more than I did. But like I said, if you've listened to this, you've either seen it or don't care about the spoilers. But I mean, I'll probably rewatch it again at some point, but it's not like when I'm chomping at the bit to buy on Blu-ray when it comes out.
Yep.
But
Let us know what you think in the comments, or email us in if you disagree, because there's been some varying opinions on this for sure. But yeah, it's just it's a shame. I was hoping this would be the film for 2016 that we could point to be like, okay, this is up there as far as the direct horror genre. This was going to be it, but it's not it for me at all. So
yep, and
we'll see about Rings coming out in October.
There's not
and
a lot
of Zombies 31.
There's not a lot of stuff left that gives me encouragement, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yep.
But that will bring this episode of the House by Video Store podcast to a close. Thanks for listening.